Dear all, welcome to this first CBAM webinar as a follow-up on the sessions we held in Brussels in person at the end of December and in January this year as well. And first of all, we'd like to cover the main topics of today is on knowing your obligation regarding CBAM, understanding all the CBAM requirements, so compliance and reporting, how to apply for an authorization in case you have not done yet, and also to get prepared for the CBAM cost and the financial compliance, which is due by September next year for the first time. Just in a nutshell, what CBAM is about. So, as you might know, we have imports into the EU of CBAM goods, so in 6 sectors: cement, fertilizers, aluminium, iron and steel, electricity, and hydrogen. And those imports needs to be declared, and this has to be done by an authorized CBAM declarant at this moment. I'll get back to that. Further on, based on the custom declarations of those CBAM goods, this information is fed into the CBAM register, where you will need to fulfill your compliance obligation in regard to CBAM. We, as National Competent Authority, we do have access to this system, and this system will be linked later on towards the central common platform, where you will be able to buy certificates, CBAM certificates, and to repurchase them in case you have bought an excess of those certificates. Just knowing that all the details have been further defined into secondary legislation, which has been published, almost all of it has been published in December 2025. There are still some upcoming implementing acts, which are expected in the course of this year, like on carbon price, on the CBAM declarations, and also on the conditions of sale and repurchase of CBAM certificates. Further on, there are some new proposals, legislative proposals ongoing to further enhance CBAM, but I'll get back to that in the end of this session. So when does CBAM apply? For sure, if you have an import of CBAM goods into the EU. Then which parts are critical in order to know how CBAM applies? For sure, there's the customs declaration. So this has been filled in correctly to ensure that the CBAM can be calculated. And there will also be a CBAM declaration that has to be submitted on a yearly basis. So no longer, as you might have been used to quarterly reporting, as we had in the transitional phase until the end of last year. But from now onwards, there will be a legal obligation, annual obligation to submit a CBAM declaration by the end of September each year. And all of this needs to happen in the CBAM register. So full compliance, and I think I mentioned already, so on the one hand, you have the administrative compliance, basically the CBAM declaration, but you also have a financial compliance. So the CBAM declaration in itself fulfills the administrative part, but you also need to surrender CBAM certificates. But let's focus on the administrative compliance first. So covering the questions whether you are subject to CBAM, depending on in which category your company is, which tire codes should you then fill in to have a correct customs declaration, and so on and so forth. So basically the administrative compliance, you need to check, do I import CBAM goods? So normally at the moment of doing this customs declaration, the customs system will tell you either you don't import CBAM goods and for sure CBAM does not apply, or if you import CBAM goods, you need to get further into details. Which CBAM goods and what's the estimated volume of those goods. So if you import electricity and hydrogen, then you're covered by CBAM anyhow. Then on other goods, like iron and steel, cement, fertilizer, or aluminium, it depends if you surpass the cumulative mass threshold of 50 tons or not. This is for all the goods imported during 1 year. So not per sector, but really all the goods from those sectors imported. So if you import electricity and hydrogen, or you import more than 50 tons of steel and iron, cement, fertilizer, or aluminium, then you're bound to CBAM. And you need to have the status of authorized CBAM declared. If you don't have that status, your goods will be blocked by the customs authorities. So, if you import less than 50 tons, then you're not bound to CBAM, meaning that you can be considered as an occasional CBAM importer or an occasional importer of CBAM goods, and no status of authorized CBAM declared is required. In this case, you should ensure that you use the tariff code Y137 in your customs declaration, just to indicate that you will not, or you intend not to surpass the 50 tons threshold of the CBAM goods imported. So based upon this flow diagram, you can know whether your company is subject to CBAM and which category basically you are falling in. Then we need to go a step further. If you're bound to the CBAM obligations, then you need to apply to obtain the status of authorized CBAM declared. If you apply through the CBAM registry, and the link will follow and more details as well, you will get a CBAM application reference number starting with APPL. This is an important number which you will need later on. So if you're a CBAM authorized declarant, meaning that the application has been processed by us, by the NCA, and was successfully processed, then you will get a CBAM account number. It's another number starting with CBAM, then the member states where it has been attributed, as well as the year of attribution. Now, how should I use those numbers in my customs declaration? Basically, if you're an occasional importer, as stated before, you don't need to mention any number. You can just use the tariff code at Y137. If you have the authorization and you have become an authorized CBAM declarant, you should use the code Y128 together with your CBAM account number. And then, if you had applied for your declaration an authorization before the end of March this year, you can, by exemption, use the tariff code Y238 together with the application number, so the APPL number. But as soon as you have obtained your CBAM account number, you should use the code Y128 together with the CBAM account number. And be careful, because any typo you made will trigger at least a warning, a system message in the CBAM register, and will require us to check in further to see whether there is an issue, an error, a mistake, obvious or not. There are also some additional customs code, and you can find the reference to those codes in the slide deck that will be available on our website as well. So who should apply for a CBAM authorization? Well, it depends. If you as an importer are established in the customs territory of the European Union, you should apply, or you can apply. If, however, you're not based or established within the EU, then you should rely on an indirect customs representative to fulfill the CBAM obligations on your behalf. If you're established in the EU, you might also opt to go through an indirect customs representative, but that indirect customs representative needs to explicitly accept to take over the CBAM obligations, including hence sending the CBAM declaration each year, but also buying the required CBAM certificates on your behalf to ensure you also fulfill the financial obligation. So the main principle to look at is the country of establishment. Afterwards, only one single application per EORI number has to be done. Meaning, if you have a Belgian EORI number, you apply in Belgium, and if you have obtained your authorization, it's valid for any import you may do in any member state of the European Union. But be careful to apply in time, because we as an NCA, we can have up to 120 days to assess the application, and this can even be extended. So be careful to apply in time, because as from now, from April onwards, there's no derogation anymore, meaning that in order to import CBAM goods, you need to have the CBAM account number, unless you applied before the end of March, where you can use the derogation still. Now, how to apply for the status of authorized CBAM declarant? Well, first of all, you need to ensure that the people who will be filling in the application have the correct role in the register of Social Security, meaning that you need to have in the eGov application to go into there and assign the role CBAM declarant portal to the persons who will then afterwards access the CBAM register. Before, we also had a taxed role, making it possible to do this application, but from May onwards, only the CBAM declarant portal role will be available to further apply for the CBAM declaration. Once you as a person have obtained the role of CBAM's declarant portal, you can access, so the third step, the CBAM declarants portal via the link shown on screen and available in the presentation afterwards. Please be aware, as indicated by step 4 and by the image on the left-hand side on the Where Are You From page, to indicate customs. So not carbon border adjustment mechanism, but customs. There you can select for Belgium. Then in most cases you will need to opt for economic operator. And lastly, also to select myself, because once you submit, the system will look and will link your personal ID towards the company and check whether you have the role CBAM declarant portal. If that is the case, he will grant you access on behalf of the company for which you have obtained the role CBAM declarant portal. Once you get in, you will see the screen as shown in the left-hand side image, where you can also fill a new application, so request for authorization. You need to submit it, meaning that you need to fill in all the document fields shown on the screen. Also attach documentation. Get back to that, you will get the link where you can see on our website all the required documentation and a step-by-step guide as well to help you and assist you in filling in this authorization. Do not forget also to fill in contact detail, email address, so that we can get in touch with you in case there would be missing information. Otherwise, notifications will be sent to the registry, but then it means that you will need to check in the register whether you have received or not any new notification. We will need to verify all the documents sent and the criteria or the data you've put in, and based on that, it will be a favorable or unfavorable decision that will be taken. If your company has been established for more than 2 years, in case of a favorable decision, we will grant you your authorization and you will get hence the CBAM account number, starting with CBAM, replacing your APPPL number. In case you have not been established for more than 2 years, we will send you a request for a guarantee. A guarantee will be calculated based upon the expected imports of CBAM goods in the coming years. Just some tips we also wanted to share with you when doing the online application as stated, or no, that's something else. So the contact details of an importer cannot be the same as the applicant in case you are applying as a customs representative. For the electricity import status, there you should indicate none of both options. So neither yes, neither no, unless for sure you are importing electricity, but so in the large majority, this won't be the case, and you should leave those radio buttons, those two, empty. And last but not least, I think you should also grant us data access, and also in the declaration of honor, you should answer positively that you comply with the requirement in order to allow us to proceed with your authorization. I said before, if you have been established less than 2 financial years, then we will need to do a calculation of a guarantee based on the volume you expect to import. And the status will only be granted, so you will only be granted the status of authorized CBAM declarant once the guarantee is received and also registered in the CBAM registry. You'll find a video explaining how to do this in the link on this slide in the presentation that will be on our website. For any further details, as stated before, you can visit our website and find out more guidance documents and more checklists and other information to help and assist you in filling out the application. Then, every year, you will need to submit a CBAM declaration. What needs to be in? Well, for sure, there are the embedded emissions, the direct embedded emissions, but also, in case for cement and fertilizers, indirect emissions. In case of iron and steel, aluminium, electricity, and hydrogen, it's only limited to direct emissions. You need to enter the volume of imports, also the third countries from where you have imported, and any carbon price paid, perhaps already in those countries of origin. It should be noted as well that, like the volume of imports and the country of origin, will already be pre-completed in the system, normally based upon the customs declarations. So most of the details, most of the data will be pre-filled already. Then on the emissions, you have the option either to use default values. Those default values have been published at the end of last year. And then in January, the finalized versions, so within the implementing acts. And you have default values, including the markups per country, per CN code, and sometimes also per production route. You could also opt to use actual emission values, but in that case, these emissions need to be verified by an accredited verifier, and a verification report needs to be submitted alongside. Third part of the CBAM declaration will then be the carbon price. If you've paid a carbon price already in the country of origin, you could either put in a default value, but therefore we are still waiting the implementing act detailing how those default values per country or per region might be calculated, or you could use put in actual values. But in that case, you will need to submit supporting documents as well. Give us a proof that you actually paid this carbon price. More details on the CBAM declaration are also expected shortly, and we assume that the Commission will also provide further webinars and explanations on filling in the CBAM declaration. So keep an eye on our website as well as on the EC website for further details on the CBAM declaration. Apart from this administrative compliance, there's, as said already, the financial obligation, the financial compliance. In 2027 and the years after, you will need to purchase CBAM certificates at least up to 50% by each quarter to cover already the embedded emissions in the imports you made during the quarter. These certificates will be bought on a central common platform that will be operational as from February 2027. However, different rules apply for the year 2026. We'll come back to that with a more detailed timeline shortly, further on in the presentation. Then the price to be paid is related to the EU ETS, and if you've overbought or bought too many certificates, then these certificates might be repurchased. Any other certificates remaining on your CBAM account and that expire will be cancelled by the Commission. So here I'm showing already the formula on how to calculate your CBAM cost or the number hence of CBAM certificates that you will need to buy. So you will need to calculate the embedded emissions, could hence be done by default values or actual emissions. And from there on, you can distract also the emissions that are covered by free allocation if you would have produced within the EU, and also emissions already covered by carbon price. For sure, you need to take into account the quantity of goods imported, meaning in tons or in megawatt hour in case of electricity. And this formula will give you the number of certificates you will need to surrender. At the end of the session, we'll come back with some practical examples. But this formula will be calculated based on the data in your CBAM declaration. It will give you an indicative number of CBAM certificates that must be surrendered. This indicative number will be displayed in the registry, we presume, probably in the second half of this year, so that you'll have the number directly in the CBAM register available. 1 ton of CO2 represents 1 CBAM certificate. Better the inverse, so 1 CBAM certificate represents 1 ton of CO2 emissions embedded in your imports. And so the quantity of goods is based on your customs declarations. So it's very important to ensure that your custom declarations are correct and certainly correctly indicating the CBAM goods. Then the price to be paid. This is the number of CBAM certificates you need to multiply by the EU ETS price. This is the price of allowances paid in the EU ETS by EU installations. This is the closing price of the auctions of the ETS allowances. And I'll detail this further later on. There's as well a distinction for the first year in 2026. The price is calculated as the average quarterly price of the ETS, meaning that every quarter the ETS price will be published. So now, on Tuesday, 7 April, for the first time, the quarterly price was published. So for the period January until March, the price of CBAM certificates has been fixed based upon the average EU ETS allowances auction price to 75.36 euros. So this is the price for any imports you made in the first quarter of 2026. So you can already calculate the cost for the imports done in the first quarter of this year. For the second, third, and fourth quarter, you can see the publication dates on the screen as well. The price is now published on the EC website, but will be integrated into the CBAM registry as well. As said, here we present a more detailed timeline. First of all, for the year 2026, and then in the coming slide, we will also do it for 2027 and the years afterwards. So for 2026, as said, you need a CBAM authorization to be able to import CBAM goods into the Union. Every quarter of this year, we will publish the quarterly CBAM price, meaning that at the end of each quarter, you will know the price that you will need to apply on the CBAM certificates for the imports made during that quarter. As from February 2027 onwards, you will be able to purchase CBAM certificates, also through the CBAM registry, which will be linked to the common central platform. So for you, it should be quite straightforward how to purchase those certificates. Further details for sure will be shared once the common central platform becomes available and once the purchases can be done. The purchases will need to be done by the 30th of September 2027 at the very latest. There's no 50% limit applicable for the year 2026, so you have from February until September, end of September, to purchase all the required CBAM certificates at the fixed price per quarter for the imports you made during the year 2026. In parallel, you also need to submit your CBAM declaration, which will be mainly pre-filled based upon all the custom declarations that have been preloaded in the system. So normally, most of the part of the CBAM declaration will be automatically be pre-completed. We'll for sure have more information later on this year, and we prepare for some information sessions by the end of the year and also next year to further explain the CBAM declaration. as well as the financial compliance obligation. If you have any excess CBAM certificates for the year 2026, you should ask to repurchase them before the end of October. Any remaining CBAM certificates afterwards will be cancelled and will hence be lost. So please be careful to request, because you need to request it, the repurchase of the exceeding CBAM certificates. Then for 2027, we have, and the years afterwards, it's slightly different in a sense that from then onwards, you will have average weekly prices determined for the CBAM certificates. They will be based on the average weekly price of the ETS, so the closing price of the auctions of ETS allowances. This closing price, the average, will be calculated every week on Monday and published, and then as from Tuesday onwards, this weekly price will be applicable. We showed the evolution of the ETS prices over the past 7 years, meaning that there are some fluctuations because it's a market and there's a trade within this market, and so prices will vary based on demand and offer. The CBAM prices, to ensure an equal level playing field between ETS operators and non-ETS or outside of EU operators, will be the same and will hence be mimicked. So as stated, the price will be changed every week based upon the EU ETS auctions done, and it will be applicable, the new price, as from Tuesday. So you can choose in which week you'll buy the allowance, the CBAM certificates. But, and I'll get to the timeline for 2027 and the years afterwards. As from then on, you will have quarterly obligations as well, meaning that during the first quarter of 2027, you will need to buy at least 50% of the CBAM certificates required to cover the embedded emissions of your import. You will need to hold the 50% for each of the quarters in 2027. You can buy, hence, these certificates every day, but the price will vary per week. So there's a weekly publication and applicability of the CBAM prices. The compliance for the year 2027 will be due by end of September 2028. So again, there's on the one hand side the administrative compliance obligation by submitting the CBAM declaration. On the other hand, there's the surrendering of the CBAM certificates you have bought. Any excess CBAM certificates bought can be requested for repurchase, but you need to do it explicitly. Any remaining certificates, CBAM certificates on your account, will be cancelled the year afterwards on 1st of November. So this will be the regular cycle as from 2027 onwards and applicable for every year. So, and this will be further explained as well in other webinars. So by this, we gave an overview of your CBAM obligations. We want also to stress the following messages, mainly that more automation is expected. All the customs data will be directly pre-filled in the CBAM registry. Also, your CBAM declarations will be pre-filled based on default values. So as long as you use default values, normally submissions should be quite straightforward. Only in case of real emission data, you will need to alter the CBAM declaration and complete it with the required information. But please note that actual emissions can only be used if they are verified by an accredited verifier. This number of CBAM certificates to be purchased and to be surrendered will be automatically calculated in the system so that you will get an indication on the number of CBAM certificates you need to buy and surrender. This will be done automatically. You will be able to, or the system will redirect you to the common central platform where you can directly buy your CBAM certificates or request repurchase of any excess CBAM certificates bought. So by this, at least we hope that we explained CBAM further in detail and that we hopefully got you some more understanding than give you the impression already that CBAM is not that complex, but it's there and you should take it into account. Upon that, I propose that we continue with CBAM financial adjustment part, really to estimate the CBAM cost. So we've prepared some examples that we would like to share with you. So we showed already the formula how to calculate the CBAM certificates. Formula will be implemented in the CBAM register and give you an indication of the number of certificates to be surrendered. One CBAM certificate represents 1 ton of goods. So before going to the example, we will go further into details of this formula and what the different parts represent. So the first part, the embedded emissions. There you can use actual default values or actual emissions. Default values are published in an implementing act. We show the reference later on. And the markup is already applied towards it. So you will see in the implementing act the default values per year, per good, and per country of origin. So you can just pick the value you will need. In case of actual values, you can directly input the actual values, but you should be able to have them verified by an accredited verifier, and there should be a verification report attached. These default values have been calculated on the most up-to-date and reliable information found by the Joint Research Center, or based upon, for example, the data collected in the transitional register. If it's not reliable, then there's always the possibility, or there will be no value, but there will be a value for the 10 exporting countries with the highest emission intensities. So if you cannot find your product code for the country of origin, then you should look into the implementing act for this value for other countries and territories. This value is a conservative approach to ensure not to underestimate the embedded emissions. CN code, you will see default value for direct, indirect, and total emissions. Electricity, the CO2 emission factor is calculated based on the average of the yearly CO2 emission factors for the most recent 5 years period with reliable data. There it's relying and based on data from the International Energy Agency. In case of cement and fertilizers, indirect embedded emissions needs to be taken into account as well. And there the default values are calculated based on averages of the emission factor of country of origin electricity grid. For precursors within our country of production, you'll have the default value of third country with the highest emission intensity for that precursor, just to prevent that operators are using a precursor produced in third countries with a high, another default value. Also, the default values might rely on the underlying production route, for example, for steel. And depending on the production route, different default values might be issued. Then, as said, there's a markup. This is based on existing deviations we noticed in EU installations. For iron, steel, aluminium, cement, and hydrogen, there's a gradual phase-in, 10% this year, 20% 27, and 30% as from 2028 onwards. This to avoid immediate, disproportionate price impacts and give more time to adapt. There are also specific considerations made for fertilizers where the markup is kept to 1%. But as stated before, the default values have been published per year with the markup already applied. So previous slides, in fact, you should just retain that you can look up just the default value for the country, for the good, for the specific year. So just to give an example, here we can see default values, including the markup for LGR, for example, for nitric acid and for unwrought aluminium. which we will later come up back in the example. There will be a revision of those default values and markups by December 2027. Even the Commission has promised to take all efforts to carry out the revision even earlier on. But so for the moment, these are the default values you should take into account. So apart from minor corrections, perhaps, these are the values you should use to calculate your CBAM cost. And with the new revision, complete revision of the default values and markups, those will be applicable, so probably as from 2028 onwards. Actual emission values can still be used, but they must be verified by an accredited verifier. The accreditation process is being established. We know that at least 4 member states are already offering the accreditation for CBAM. So there should be sufficient verifiers available also to verify your actual emissions. What we always stress to any importer is to get in contact already with the verifier. Most likely the ETS verifiers will be accredited for CBAM as well, to ensure that they will be able to do the CBAM verification on your behalf. Many of them we know already occupied in getting the CBAM accreditation, but they can hence already assist you in preparing you or your operators in the third countries to get prepared as well, to ensure that the verification done early next year, for example, will work out and will be able to provide you or have as an outcome an actual verification report and enables you to use the actual emissions. Second part in the formula were the emissions covered by free allocation. This is to ensure the equal level playing field between EU and non-EU installations. Because in the EU, free allocation is given to avoid carbon leakage to all most EU ETS installation. And this is based on benchmarks. Come back to that. Benchmarks indicating the 10% most efficient, best performing EU ETS installation. There's also a CBAM factor, which is phasing in the CBAM, so to speak, or phasing out free allocation in the EU ETS. And there's a third part, is the cross-sectoral correction factor, which is a factor that will be applied linearly to all free allocation across the EU in case that the total quantity available for free allocation would not be sufficient based upon the EU benchmark to do the free allocation up until the end of this period, so up until the end of 2030. For the moment, it is expected that this cross-sectoral correction factor will remain 1 and hence will not affect the formula as such. So as stated, the CBAM benchmarks have been designed in an analogy with the EU ETS. Fortunately, the EU ETS benchmarks are still being finalized. So the CBAM benchmarks have been defined on the estimation, the best estimation of what the EU ETS benchmarks will probably look like. CBAM benchmarks will, however, need to be revised once the ETS benchmarks will be known. And those revised benchmarks will only become available as from next year onwards to give certainty that the current benchmarks can be used and should be used to calculate your CBAM cost. The CBAM benchmarks are determined per CN code and also per production route. So you can see also that there will be CBAM benchmarks for when you're using actual emissions, column A in the Implementing Act, or CBAM benchmarks when using default values, column B in the Implement. Basically, we reflect the same condition as used for default values, meaning the production route, origin of the precursors, composition of goods. Some simplified assumptions are taken if needed. And there's some further assumptions like the goods are being produced during the year of import, unless proven otherwise. Precursors are produced during the reporting period of their complex good, but, so as said, they can be rebutted if you provide the evidence. There's no free allocation adjustment for electrical energy because there's no free allocation for electricity under the EU ETS either. So here we see the example of benchmarks given for, again, the fertilizer and aluminium products for which we showed the default values previously. Full revision of the benchmarks will anyhow be done in the year 2027. Shortly on the CBAM factor, we showed the diagram already, but here you can see the percentages by which so the free allocation in the EU ETS will be phased out and the CBAM will be phased in. This factor is defined in the ETS directive. So by 2034, there will no longer be free allocation within the EU ETS for the sectors covered by CBAM, and the sectors covered by CBAM will face the full CBAM cost of their production. For a sectoral correction factor, as stated before, is to ensure that the total amount of free allowances allocated is not exceeding the maximum allowed. But it's set to 1, and probably it will remain 1, although it might be changed by the end of the phase, but this should be known rather in advance and will only be a small minor downwards correction. Last part in the formula is standard carbon price paid in third countries. Only for certain countries this will be possible. The implementing regulation was foreseen for the first quarter of 2026, but unfortunately it has been delayed, and so it's expected to sort out soon. And I think the best way to get the full understanding of this formula is through some practical examples. So let's take the formula and apply it to, for example, a fertilizer product where no carbon price is paid yet. So if we take the following CN code of nitrate of potassium and we import, let's say, 57,000 tons of those goods originating from Algeria, let's say we've imported in Q1 of this year, then we can look up the default value, including the 1% markup. This is 2.08064. So the nitrate of potassium imported from Algeria. The CBAM benchmark for the same CN code is 0.626, and the CBAM factor in 2026 is 97.5%. As has been published on Tuesday, April 7, the ETS price taken into account, the average ETS price in Q1 2026 is 75.36 euros. So if we put those data elements into the formula explained before, then this adds up to 110,000 CBAM certificates. At the price of 75.36 euros, this would mean that the financial compensation to be paid before the end of September next year will amount to 8,289,600 euros. So this will be the price you will need to pay to buy 110,000 CBAM certificates in the CBAM, through the CBAM register, so between February and September next year. If you now take a second example of another product, like aluminium slabs, let's say 2,000 tons, also import from Algeria, then we see that the embedded emissions, aluminium from the sector route, they have another default value, including as well the 10% markup. Whilst for the fertilizers, it was 1% markup, but it's included in the default value that we can get from the implementing act. So the embedded emissions amount to 0.396. The CBAM benchmark amounts to 0.091, and the CBAM factor for 2026 is 97.5%. The Q1 price, as said before, was 75.36. If we fill in those data elements into the formula, we'll get 610 CBAM certificates that would need to be bought for these 2,000 tons of aluminium imported in Q1 2020, amounting at the published price to 45,969.6 euros. If we take this example now a little bit further and have a look at the year, another country. So if we're importing the same aluminium slabs, 2,000 tons, but now coming from Argentina, and we have as embedded emissions a much higher number, because it's based on primary route being more electric intensive. So there the embedded emissions amounted to 0.233. The CBAM benchmark as well is much higher due to the primary route is 1.423. CBAM factor remains for the year 2026 the same, as well as the ETS price upon which the CBAM certificate price is based. So filling in those data elements, we get to 1,690 CBAM certificates that would need to be bought for a similar 2,000 tons of aluminium, amounting already to 127,358.4 euros. Yeah. Taking this example 2 years later, so the year 2028, to see the difference. We still have the same amount of aluminium being imported from Argentina. We see, however, that the embedded emissions are higher due to the markup, increasing from 2026 at 10% to 30% from 2028 onwards. The CBAM benchmark remains the same, but the CBAM factor as well has decreased. So from 97.5%, it's now already 90%. And also the ETS price might have changed. So assuming it has increased and is now 85 euro. Filling in those data elements for the same 2,000 tons amounts already to 2,720 CBAM certificates, representing a financial value of 231,200 euros, so significantly higher. However, it might be that Argentina could introduce also a carbon price. Talks ongoing, they might have some price, for example, in 2028. In that case, you can distract it from the price you need to pay, because CBAM is about environmental integrity. It's not about double taxation. We want to avoid that. We need just to ensure that the emissions embedded in the production of the goods are being covered by a carbon price. So this way, if there would be an ETS, there would be a way to deduct the carbon price you've paid already, stating that a factor 1.2 would be paid per ton of good under this ETS or CBAM system in Argentina. In that way, it could be deducted, and the amount of CBAM certificates to be bought would be far less. For example, here, lowering to 320. At the same price in 2028 of 85 euros, presumably, it would amount just to 27,200 euros. In case the carbon price paid abroad would already be much higher and even higher of the ETS price, then there would even be no CBAM cost associated. But still, there would be a CBAM declaration to be submitted. So to end this session and this webinar, we'd like to share also the legal references and the legal basis. This remains for sure the main CBAM regulation, including the simplification with the mass threshold of 50 tons. But all further practical arrangements on CBAM have been made in implementing acts on the CBAM registry, on the status of authorized CBAM declarants, on the communication by customs authorities, and goods brought to the continental shelf or the EEZ, European Economic Zone. There is also the verification of embedded emission. So there's acts on accreditation and verification principles, and the methods for calculation of embedded emissions embedded in goods. There's also implementing acts on the financial adjustments, so the establishment of the default values quite important to calculate the cost. Also the calculation of the free allocation adjustment containing the benchmark values, and then the calculation and publication of this price of CBAM certificates. There are some legislative proposals still under discussion and still to become out. So the carbon price paid in third countries is expected shortly. The details on CBAM declarations will be worked out further as well this year. And then in December, the Commission has launched two proposals. One proposal on the extension of CBAM scope to its downstream goods and also on the anti-circumvention measures. There's a full impact assessment accompanying this proposal. And there's also a second proposal on the establishment of a temporary decarbonization fund, which is in fact a temporary solution for export of CBAM goods produced in the EU towards outside the EU. And there's a review report on the application of the CBAM regulation. This review report is due every 2 years. And by these legal references and this legislative proposal, which we expect the one on the downstream goods to be hopefully discussed by this summer and to be finalized later on this year, we hope that we gave an overview on the CBAM, on its requirements, on its compliance cycle. But for sure, we remain available for any further questions. You can reach us at the general email contact address info.cbam@health.fgov.be. We wish you all a pleasant day. Bye.